Hi to everybody joining. We're just going to give it 10 seconds or so, let people dial in, and thank you for joining on time. All right, we'll kick it off. Hi, everybody. We are thrilled to have you and excited to talk about today's topic, social media for private equity. I'm joined by a few wonderful speakers, including my colleague, Courtney Flogel. I'm Tim Quinn, Senior Vice President on the Edelman Smithfield team, and we'll kick it off, and I'll hand it over to Courtney.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Courtney Flogel. I'm a senior account supervisor on the Edelman Smithfield digital team, where Tim and I work amongst a robust list of clients across the private equity, capital markets, and financial services industries. Can't thank you all enough for making the time to join us, especially on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. So we're going to make sure and ensure that it's worth your while and keep it as light as possible, or at least as light as you can keep social media for private equity. First, a preview of what we're going to dive into today. So why we're here. I think we've really gathered here today because in 2023, social media is no longer a nice to have or a side project that you might assign to an intern. It's undeniable that social channels are now a fundamental part of a communication strategy that PE firms are leveraging. Whether you're joining us today to learn about what it takes to start a new page or perhaps just up-level an existing company or personal profile, we're so excited and we've prepared something that we think everybody can grab something from. And we brought together 4 PE practitioners across 4 specialty areas, challenging us all to kind of get into our different areas in under 10 minutes. And then we'll end with a wrap up and Q&A at the end. So please do be sure to drop in any questions into the chat. You can do so with your name attached to it or anonymously if you don't want anybody to see.
All right, thank you very much, Courtney. So that's the Edelman Smithfield team, and we have 2 really special guests. Can't thank them enough for joining. Devin Banerjee from LinkedIn. Many of you have probably worked with him in the past. He's the Senior Managing Editor of Industry News and Community at LinkedIn, as well as Leslie Esposito, a partner at McDermott, Will & Emery, who will go through some legal considerations that we should all keep in mind when pursuing a social media program in the world of private equity. All right, industry landscape. What we're going to do is just take a quick step back and tell you a little bit about what we're seeing in the space, as well as what we think is to come. We work with a number of different clients and firms in private equity, so we think we have a pretty good vantage point. A number of you, I'm sure, if you're a practitioner in this space, have either created a slide like this or seen a slide like this. And what it really just is a snapshot of is today's media landscape. As many of you, I'm sure, know, the coverage of the industry has gone from coming from the financial world and private equity trades to being much more mainstream. So you may have somebody who's learning about private equity for the first time, reading in the New Yorker or the Atlantic, or reading their hometown paper, or reading CBS News. And sometimes these headlines, as we all know, can be pretty challenging. And so social media, clearly, it has a real place within the suite of communications. And I think we all recognize as practitioners in the space that it's essential for telling your firm's narrative. But what is really important, at least to our team and our thesis on the space, and I'm sure to many of you, is that it's not just there for good corporate hygiene, and it's an essential tool to reach your stakeholders, whether it's limited partners speaking about the investment strategy before a fundraise, or maybe it's prospective management teams speaking to a portfolio niche that you have within a certain vertical and your expertise. Or other private equity sponsors speaking to how you're a good steward of private equity assets. And that's all really important and goes beyond just corporate hygiene. All right, so to break down what we're seeing in the industry, we're seeing a lot of different things, but we wanted to focus on just 4 key areas. One is what we like to call firms opening up. We saw a lot of this after the financial crisis with the banks. We're seeing this with private equity firms. Increasingly, they're opening up to the public and showcasing their leaders. Secondly, what we'll get into is just the increasing pressure on organic content, especially while paid budgets are being reduced. Thirdly, we'll speak to portfolio companies and how it's increasingly taking a prominent role in just the full array of what private equity firms are talking about on social. And then lastly, we'll address executive profiles. A lot of firms have established corporate profiles, but increasingly we're seeing individuals have their own. All right, now in terms of opening up the firm, what we're seeing and really what we mean by that, just to illustrate it a little bit more, is just a greater sense of accessibility among many senior leaders at the firm, not just the CEO, but it may be vertical leads. And so what that's doing is just engendering a sense of familiarity and giving insight into how the firm operates and its culture. It's especially important just to demystify the industry, and it's something we're seeing a lot of, as I'm sure many of you know. Firms are also expanding beyond LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great corporate channel, but we're also seeing greater use of Twitter and Instagram for its own needs and uses. And then lastly, another thing that we wanted to call out is company values and principles in action. And so what does that mean? Opposed to just speaking about it or putting out certain words, really showing how the firm is doing that tangibly on the ground in certain situations. One key insight we wanted to call out is a recent Bain survey as well. And it got into a topic as it relates to high net worth individuals and the foray into retail investing. And it found that many firms, the wealthy people, said that the private equity firm they knew the most was actually, I don't know. That's what rose to the top. It wasn't any individual brand. And as firms think about opening up and pushing on the brand side, that's really important to keep in mind that we're really just at the beginning here. Now, in terms of where we're going, we think we'll see a shift towards more relaxed content, authentic content. Courtney will speak to how important that is going forward and just today, exploring even more channels. So beyond LinkedIn, beyond Twitter, beyond Instagram, really going to wherever important conversations are taking place. Because if they're talking about your industry or your firm, that's something you should probably consider. And then lastly, just even greater emphasis on the value proposition that private equity has for society, just given all of the media headwinds that the industry is facing. Number two, more pressure on organic content. We've seen pressure on paid spend. It's down considerably this year, no surprise. Continued uptick in the use of video. Courtney and Devin will speak more to this. That's really, really important. We did a little desk side research before today's session, and we found that about 25%, 1 in 4 posts among private equity firms that are publicly traded include video. And that's something that we think we'll see even more use of going forward because it gets a lot more engagement. Another thing we think we'll see going forward is also just more focus on how to organically create more engagement, whether that's individuals sharing posts or liking posts on behalf of the corporate handle. We think that's something that we'll see more of given the pressure on paid budgets. So a little bit more creativity there. And then lastly, just more consideration on the type of approach or the voice you take to each social channel. Sometimes what we see in the industry is a post will be repurposed from one to another without much thought given to the actual words. But going forward, we think we'll see a bit more nuance there. Number three is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about is the portfolio companies and spotlighting portfolio companies. At the end of the day, this is where private equity firms drive their impact in addition to what they do for their LPs and the beneficiaries. So what we're seeing in the industry, as many of you know, and I'm sure many of you incorporate into your own communication programs, are CEO testimonials, portfolio company explainers, sharing honors and milestones. This is becoming all the more prominent and is really a mainstay. And it's a way to counterbalance the type of narrative that we've seen in the press and we highlighted a few slides ago. Now, in terms of where we're going, we think things could get even more creative, highlighting the impact of PE ownership as explained by employees. So going down the seniority and addressing just for your average employee, your average person working there, what does it mean to be private equity owned? If we rely just on what's reported on in the press, it can be less favorable. Another thing is the benefit, perhaps explaining the benefit of PE ownership to end users. So think of healthcare other services that are critical to society, explaining, say, if you're a patient or you're somebody who benefits from that service and the company's private equity owned, that could be really good to showcase in articulating that value that the industry has. And then another thing we think about and we could see going forward is perhaps check-ins with portfolio companies year after exit to show the enduring value of private equity. It's a topic that's obviously been discussed. And so we think that it's something that if you're using your own channel, your own messaging, it could be really an interesting thing to do, especially around anniversaries. Lastly, individual profiles. We are, as I mentioned, seeing more of this, especially well-manicured individual profiles at the larger firms. In some recent survey research that we did back in November, our team found that 80% of fund managers say that they look at social media output of a company and its management team when they're making investment decisions. Clearly, there's a lot of focus on this. And also highlighting employees' stories and honors. These are all things that we're seeing at the individual level, so beyond just the corporate page. Now, in terms of where we're going in the future, and this is something, again, that will be highlighted by the other panelists today, is expanded use of individual profiles among firms of all sizes, so not just the bigger ones. We see more of that at the bigger ones, but perhaps we'll start to see that among maybe smaller firms with smaller footprints. Also, more coordination among individual profiles to amplify messaging, again, to get more out of your organic content given pressure on paid budgets. And then lastly, employees sharing their own stories directly to their audiences. This is another way to create that authenticity we talked about when we were thinking about opening up the firm and how that's a really big trend in the industry. So that's the last trend that we wanted to highlight, and I'll hand it over to my colleague Courtney to take it to the next part of the presentation here.
Awesome. I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much, Tim. I think that was 10 minutes on the dot, and so I will do my best to continue our good name and keep that trend going. These next I'm unmuted now, correct? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, it looks like one of the hosts is accidentally muting me. Perfect. We are good now, I think. So I'm going to continue to talk. Now I get 11 minutes, kidding. So really what I'm going to be diving into is, taking it a step further beyond just what we're seeing other firms doing and really talking about how we can apply that and act on it to drive the most impact to your own social channels. To ensure that I can keep my examples, I know Devin will have some more specific names to name, but to ensure that I can at least keep my examples representative and unbiased to really be speaking to what we're seeing in the industry at large, we've invented this fictitious firm. You can see this logo here, Edelman Smithfield Equity Partners, whose logo I had far too much developing, which will be our representative vessel throughout these applications. So using anecdotes with this fictional firm, we're going to do a deeper dive into each of the 4 overarching observations that Tim just walked us through and how we might apply those learnings to transform them into applications on your firm's social channels and even your own. So first up, opening the firm via your social media channels. When we say opening up the firm on social channels, we really mean utilizing digital platforms to be a visual answer to one question: what distinguishes you from all of the others in the industry? What we're seeing is that more firms are using their social channels and having them centered around defined content themes. And they do this by taking that key distinguisher to inform the building of what I like to call pillars, because they really do serve as the foundation to a firm's social strategy and make sure that it's grounded in that. Here on this slide, we have an example of what a potential content strategy mix might look like for ES Equity Partners, a steady mix between portfolio company news, recruitment efforts, about the investment strategy and firm, and of course, ESG and DE&I. A diversified content strategy will ensure that you're speaking to the right audiences and developing content that's geared toward them, whether that be portfolio companies, limited partners, financial media, and talent, likely a mixture of all of those to hold their attention. We're also seeing the top firms doing a really great job at tailoring their content very clearly to their audience sets. That again starts with your North Star narrative, that key distinguisher, which is the easy part to define it. The tougher part is to remain grounded in that throughout the varying changes and ever-growing demands that social media and digital is. It's definitely easy to let social take a back seat when times are tough, but the firms that are still, publishing a regular, consistent cadence of content, even when they might not have deal announcements every week or promotion cycles every month to be able to showcase, they're building long-term trust with their audiences, and not to mention, utilizing a fairly low-cost vehicle to be able to tell your story and amplify that on your own terms. Based off of the story you have to tell and the types of content, you can there align on platform roles and making sure that your visual identity and that consistent cadence is something that's going to support that. Last but not least, as Tim had kind of previously teased before, we're seeing a lot more firms open up their doors on social channels and being a little bit more authentic and original than we'd seen in the past. Now, I don't think that this means every single person on this line has now taken to their own TikTok videos, and not saying we're quite there yet. But in terms of, since organic social isn't gated or targeted, its performance really hinges on the scale and the quality of the activity. And so the top performing content that we're actually seeing across firms is largely original content that is showcasing the people behind the investments and the news announcements. Through social channels, you can tap into leverage testimonials, provide human touch points. And of course, in our example here, we are showcasing an interview with two of the firm's fictitious executives, expanding beyond, just the standard business as usual content. So 2, making your content work smarter and harder. We're already nearing the end of Q1, if you can believe it. I surely can't. And it's definitely never a bad idea to conduct a classic social media channel audit to remind and uncover, or at least reinforce the top performing content to ensure that your strategy is highly centric to the highest return on investment opportunities. One of those investment opportunities that we are continuing to see it prove itself time and time again is video. Platforms like Instagram Reels and TikTok are continuing to really showcase the value and how a video can really capture user attention in ways that we're just static quote graphics and other static imagery simply can't. So, and what we're saying by don't shy away from video, we're really summarizing this trend that firms of all sizes are no longer limiting their video sharing to just the ultra produced, commercial-like segments, and they're opting to start implementing and integrating more short form slice of life like content, if you will. We're also seeing more firms editing, cutting, and sizing the same types of social clips into content that's customized for respective platforms. As you can assume, that means longer form, videos and pieces on LinkedIn and YouTube, whereas there might be shorter cuts on Twitter and Instagram Reels. By focusing on video and other high value content, especially the ones that can be repurposed, firms really have and are using this as an opportunity to tell a connected story across their channels. So no matter where a user is seeing them, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or their website, it's telling a cohesive message in the way that's best catered to the audience by that respective platform. 3, showcase the value add of portfolio companies. So when you start to think about your content strategy and when it comes to content to populate your page, portfolio news, unsurprisingly, is going to likely be your first place to start. Firms have the opportunity to use their social and digital channels really as a vehicle to raise the profile of their different, various portfolio companies and specialty areas, focusing on the stories of exceptional business owners and how their innovations are really supporting, critical societal needs. The first example from ES Equity Partners here is just of a simple branded graphic highlighting a recent investment. What would make this example even deeper or be able to extend the life cycle of this is if there were subsequent follow-up posts promoting more than just, the single pull quote from the press release that we all know exactly where to look for in that portion of the paragraphs, and really, share updates along the journey so that users can feel like they're part of it. Beyond just business deals, firms are also going a layer deeper to promote, impact and initiatives that they and their portfolio companies are engaging in. This example here in the middle is a mock-up of a fake landing page on ES Equity Partners website, giving a spotlight into some of the stories of portfolio companies that are making real impact to drive positive change to end users. Lastly, and perhaps less of a trend, but more of a missed opportunity, I believe, is staying connected and engaged. Or as I like to say, making social networking again. Social channels are really a low effort, high return way to have positive engagements with portfolio companies, executives, other peers in the industry, just as a public way to be able to reinforce your firm's commitment and also maintain an open and authentic dialogue. So for instance, from your firm's page, that could include reshares of portfolio company announcements, accolades, and big wins. From your own page, I don't know the last time, and even as I'm saying this, I'm guilty of it, do as I say, not as I do, but the last time I just scrolled my own LinkedIn page just to see, what my connections are talking about, where can I just, like something, where can I be engaging, where can I be adding a thought-provoking or, value-adding perspective? The opportunity is there. And lastly, integrating employees at every stage of the social journey. A social channel that is crucial, that is not to be overlooked, is that of your employees. What we're seeing is that a lot of the top firms are really activating and using their firm's employees as their biggest ambassadors and support system. And especially depending on, the size of, especially of some of these like large firms today, there's all the opportunity to activate them as, part of that audience. We recommend revisiting your company's employee social media policy at least once a year, especially in this past year with all of the more move to the authentic nature. And actually, and what we've been doing with a lot of our clients and peers is that we've also been including not just a policy of what not to do, but also some value add in addition to that of what to do. Here's what you can post on social. Here's if we have a deal announcement, what it could look like. Providing LinkedIn branded banners to be able to give them a subtle way to go refresh their own LinkedIn page and update that bio. Encouraging collaboration. I think more firms are also now using social to really foster this information sharing amongst their employees in a way that the platforms just didn't support before, let alone, we didn't see a lot of happening. I think this can include LinkedIn Life pages, which, sorry, Devin, I realize I'm stepping on your toes already. I know you're going to get to more of that in just a second. But I think that the point here is that, we've really seen this to be a contributing driver to building strong employee camaraderie and really enforcing a firm's culture as a way to stay connected beyond just office walls. And last but certainly not least from me is preparing to activate. Activating your employees on social as ambassadors really starts with that top-down value proposition and inviting your employees to be part of it by engaging on their own channels. Like I said, this can be customizable post templates around deal announcements. When you have key new hires, creating a custom graphic to welcome them to the team and perhaps creating a variation that they can share on their own. Over preparation will ensure buy-in and that your employees can be part of your journey. Because I think the net of my whole section here, and it looks like I actually did 9 minutes, is that social isn't going away, especially not with the new young talented workforce that's only just now starting. And so it's a good time to get on board and make the most of it. Hopefully there wasn't too much overlap there, Devin, because I am thrilled to hear from the expert himself on all things LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Courtney and Tim and Edelman, for the invitation. Great to be with all of you. See a lot of familiar names attending, and happy to chat through some of these beautiful slides that Edelman has prepared. So first of all, there are a million things you could do on LinkedIn. I'm going to speak through a couple big areas. The first is our efforts and energy behind enabling and supporting creators on LinkedIn. These are people and companies posting and creating content on LinkedIn. I'm going to speak through new advanced tools. Once you get your table stakes, kind of healthy LinkedIn diet in order, there are some kind of advanced desserts, if you will, to consider. I'm going to talk about analytics and building an audience. I know all of you work for and deal with stakeholders in your firms who are very quantitative, analytics, metrics-driven people. And I'll talk about some tailwinds we're seeing and some of my predictions for the future. And by the way, as I said, there are a million things you can do on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you have questions. I want to re-emphasize what Tim said at the start, which is please do put your questions for me, especially in the Q&A tab. I probably have unread emails from some of you with questions that I just haven't been able to get to, so now is your chance. All right, so let's dive into creating on LinkedIn. As Courtney was actually saying, the net of her section is that social media is effective media if you are social. I always say you have to give in order to get on social media and LinkedIn in particular. So you have to get into this creator mindset. Creating on LinkedIn, sharing on LinkedIn, engaging on LinkedIn is how you grow a following, grow your community, whether we're talking about an executives page or a company or brand page. It's how you create and find business opportunities, and it's how you kind of, engage your stakeholders, the important stakeholders that you have. There are some profile best practices. This is a great place to start in terms of just getting your table stakes established with your executives, your C-suite, the thought leaders or ambassadors that you want out there representing your firm and your brand in the world. I won't go through, reading through all 5 of these. And to many of us in your roles, they may be obvious. It's basically completing that LinkedIn profile and taking advantage of all of the fields available to you. But when you're sitting down across your executives, I know, they're going to ask you what the value of all of these fields is. You just want that profile to be complete. You want, when others land on it and see that follow button, on the front of their profile, they have a reason to click follow. They have enough information to give them a preview of what your leader and your brand talks about, cares about, what it stands for. So you really have to think about all of these elements: the profile photo, the cover photo. We see a lot of people without cover photos still. Look at this great one that Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone has of him, speaking to, I think, like a new class probably at the firm. You want to use your headline field, which shows up under your content in the feed. You want to have your summary, very clear and engaging. There's a featured section at the top of the profile to embed media. This can be third-party links, interviews that your executive has done externally, or external stories or narratives about your brand or your executive. You want to take advantage of these fields. So again, a great example here by Steve, who is the king of this industry. And so definitely use him as a role model. Once you have some of these table stakes set up, and there's actually kind of a healthy LinkedIn diet I'll get into on the next slide, but these are a few of the tools or the bells and whistles that I'm asked most about these days, because we've rolled these out over the past, call it 12 to 24 months. One of our most recent formats, and this is available to the personal pages or your executives pages, as well as your company or brand page, is carousels. It's probably the most visually engaging format we have on LinkedIn. It cleans up a lot of the posts that you may have done in the past with multiple photos and images, and then we used to put it in this messy collage that randomly cropped each image when you view the post as a standalone post. Now we have this kind of sliding format where people can click through, slides or images through one post. You can have them kind of scrolling automatically. You can have images mixed with video in one post as people slide through the carousel. LinkedIn newsletters. This has probably been one of the most kind of fastest growing features we've rolled out in recent years. It's a way to serialize your long form publishing on LinkedIn. I have seen, not yet in the private equity space in particular, but in a lot of traditional investment management firms, and I can share some great examples in the chat after my section, a lot of newsletter pickup. The reason being, these firms, and yours too probably, are already creating a lot of great long form content. I see on your websites a lot of sections or tabs entitled insights or research or blog or white papers. All of that content you're already creating. It's already being approved by legal and compliance to be public facing out there in the world. A LinkedIn newsletter can be a landing page or a repository for all of that long form content. There's some powerful distribution tools for LinkedIn newsletters. It invites all of the followers of the page to subscribe to the newsletter. For many of you, your company pages have built huge followings over time. This is a way to kind of tap into those large followings by inviting all of them to subscribe to a newsletter. When you publish to the newsletter in the future, it notifies directly everyone who has subscribed. It's like a push notification to the front of your phone, to the front of the readers' phones. and an email alert as well to subscribers. Events on LinkedIn. We've been doing these a lot as a team. We've seen a lot of companies pick this up. Again, not yet in the private equity space. I've seen some big banks doing these events. JP Morgan has done LinkedIn Lives before. Some big traditional asset managers have done LinkedIn Lives and audio events when they have research coming out or an event that they stream publicly, or their leader is speaking at a conference and you can plug into the conference's stream, things like that. So we have LinkedIn Live, which is a live video streaming capability, and we have audio, which is a live audio room, kind of like a Clubhouse, for those of you who remember the brief Clubhouse era. Again, very popular. We just, before this call, did a LinkedIn Live with Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank. That went fantastically. So great way to engage your audience. It notifies all of the followers of your page. Again, your company pages have probably built up huge followings over time. I've seen hundreds of thousands of followers on some of the big private equity firms' pages. These are some of the tools to tap into that big follower base. This is another question I get all the time, which is, how do I know if I'm being successful on LinkedIn? How do I know if my brand is achieving success? And also, what do I report to my, head of marketing or COO or whoever you all report to, who again, probably is quantitative minded in nature. So we've rolled out a lot of advanced analytics. I would encourage you to just play around with these if you're an admin of your company page. Or ask whoever is an admin of your LinkedIn company page to make you one as well, and just check out the analytics. We've really improved this. You can see, follower growth over time, demographic makeup of your followers by geographies, by competitor companies or employers in your space, by job titles, all of those kind of things. You can start getting a sense of where your audience is coming from on desktop or mobile, and then optimize your content accordingly. We have some other tools for the LinkedIn pages. You can create these in your admin dashboard, some community hashtags that then you can get a stream of what posts on LinkedIn are using that hashtag. So you can put in the name of your firm, you can put in hashtag private equity. If you've had a campaign, for example, one of the big private equity firms just launched a branded campaign last week on social media with its own hashtag. You could put that into your admin view and track what other people are saying with those hashtags that you care about. That would allow you to engage with those posts and that other content, and kind of reward your audience who are following your campaign. The admins of your page, of course, can invite all of their networks to follow the page. So this is a tactic I've seen some big firms use, which is adding to their admin dashboard or their admin list some others in the firm with big followings or big networks, and then automatically inviting all of those networks to follow the company page. So on the next slide, this is kind of the healthy LinkedIn diet that we talk about. This is kind of a complete diet. This is pretty advanced, I know for many of you, and where you are in the evolution of your firm's use of social media. But there are a lot of one-time things you can do to just kind of lay the groundwork. As Courtney said, you want to activate your employees, your brand ambassadors. I have heard that term, ambassadors, so many times now from, honestly, specifically the big private equity firms. They're thinking about a group of 30 or a couple dozen or just a dozen leaders, heads of funds, heads of strategies, heads of geographies, to be their ambassadors. You want to have a one-time kind of process with them internally to get all their profiles set up and optimized, and using all of our best practices. And then, once you get those pages set up and your company page set up, you should think about, for your company page, a very consistent cadence of posting. I know this says daily here. I just want to emphasize consistency over frequency. I don't equate the two. You don't have to be posting frequently. You want to be posting consistently. You want people who come across your page and consider following it to see that there is consistent insights, consistent knowledge, consistent engaging content that they'll be getting if and when they click follow on your page. yes, you can work your way up to daily with your company page, but I just want to emphasize consistency right now. I see a lot of firms reviewing analytics on a weekly basis, some on a monthly or quarterly basis. This is where you can really get a sense of whether you're achieving success. I see a lot of firms looking at their audience demographics on a quarterly basis and noting any shifts, in those demographics. Are people responding differently, reacting differently to the content you've been putting out in the past month? I've seen some firms, using geography specific content campaigns if they're moving into a new region or a new area. I know of a big private equity firm a couple of years ago who I kind of helped with some Southeast Asia specific content, because guess what? They were about to raise a dedicated fund and search for deals and connect with entrepreneurs and business owners in that region. So you want to review those demographics and see if you're achieving the success as you define it. And again, monthly, just review your admin dashboard on your company page, those hashtags. Make sure you're kind of educating your employees perhaps on a monthly or quarterly basis about LinkedIn best practices, reminding them to post. If you have an intranet or some kind of internal communication system, making sure that the top posts from that month or that time period are in front of your employees for them to consider resharing or reposting. So these are some stats from the horse's mouth. You've probably read a lot of random stats about LinkedIn from dubious sources. This is from the horse's mouth about how things have been going on LinkedIn. So in the past 12 months, we've seen almost a 30% increase in public conversations happening on the platform. During the prime COVID years, 2020 to 2021 and 21 to 22, that was closer to 35 to 40%. Still pretty phenomenal growth for us. This is compounding on a really large base, if you think about it, given the amount of content flowing through the LinkedIn ecosystem right now. We have seen a lot of engagement increasing with the company pages as well. That has kind of ebbed and flowed over time, at least in my experience. We're seeing that interaction and engagement with company pages back up. We're seeing company pages posting a lot more consistently, on average 2.1 days per week as of a few months ago. That's a really great cadence in my opinion, in my perspective. Again, newsletters, very fast growing on the platform, up 10 times year over year in terms of creation of LinkedIn newsletters. But that total number is really just 63,000 out of 900 million people on LinkedIn. So there's still, for people who wonder, is our newsletters too saturated? There are a million newsletters out there. How is mine going to stand out? There's still a lot of white space, I think, for newsletter creation and engagement on LinkedIn. And then some predictions for the future. By the way, these are my personal predictions. This isn't my company guidance or something. So Leslie, don't call Gary after this. But yeah, I think we'll see 1 billion people on LinkedIn this year. We have 900 million right now, or as of December 31. I'm just seeing a lot more corporate news originating on LinkedIn. As Tim and Courtney said, it's a place and a vehicle to share your news and tell your story in your own way. You're not relying on the 1 or 2 or 3 quotes that the reporter will pull out from your 60-minute interview with them. You can tell the story the way you want and share the news the way you want. I'm seeing this domino effect with I've been seeing this for the 5 years I've been at LinkedIn, which is, and I'm sure all of you in your roles are seeing it as well. A lot of your peers and competitors, frankly, are doing more on LinkedIn, and the leaders of their firms are getting on LinkedIn. When you're sitting across the leader of your firm, consider telling him or her that. That tends to get their attention. I think this domino effect will only continue. The quality of the user-generated the content we're seeing brands and people create is only multiplying right now because of a lot of great softwares and tools that have really come to the fore. Canva, for example, a lot of you probably use it. I'm just seeing a lot of really great kind of storytelling and content coming out of your firms, the agencies you work with, and it's just really, really engaging. I've seen that kind of re-accelerate. And then one thing we're working on kind of quietly here at LinkedIn, but very energetically, is making the discoverability of on-platform content a lot better off-platform, including things like search engine optimization. We're changing a lot of things on the back end to make LinkedIn content more discoverable off-platform. So all of this investment you're making and the energy you're putting into content on LinkedIn and other social channels, but on LinkedIn in particular, will surprise you in the ROI. It's going to show up more in those search results. It's going to show up more just across destinations off of LinkedIn as well. It's not like LinkedIn is some closed ecosystem where only people on LinkedIn are going to be seeing your content. So I'll pause there and hand things over to Leslie. I just want to re-emphasize to put questions for me in the Q&A in the chat. I'm going to take a look right now.
Excellent. And Devin, you will see a number of questions there. So I will move through the legal stuff as quickly as I can. I'm sure folks will be relieved to know I only have 2 slides, so we'll touch on some of the core principles. But it is worth talking about legal compliance. Devin mentioned this kind of domino effect he's seeing in terms of engagement on social media. And I agree with that. And I see more and more companies and individuals kind of diving in and increasing their engagement without necessarily knowing some of the guardrails, some of the legal do's and don'ts. So let's talk about it. And let's start, before we kind of dive in on a couple of the guiding principles, about enforcement, just to give you the lay of the land. So there is a lot of active enforcement right now on social media. At the federal level, you have the Federal Trade Commission getting a lot of headlines and a lot of multi-million-dollar settlements and penalties for folks who are not compliant with social media guidelines. You also have state AGs who are getting involved. Other agencies like the SEC, they're a little bit late to the party, if you will, but they have been getting, in my opinion, increasingly active in social media enforcement, that is. And when you have all of that federal enforcement, the class action bar is never too far behind. And a lot of those folks are casting pretty wide nets when it comes to liability. So they're going after the individuals who are making the posts that are arguably not compliant, as well as any companies related to the posts. So with that kind of active, aggressive environment, what are the guiding principles for legal compliance in social media? So first, adopt a compliance mindset. And what I mean by that is basically think about compliance. Don't just dive in, look for that lifeguard first, if you will. So understand what compliance looks like on social media for you, for your company. Understand what the do's and don'ts are for any posts that you're going to be making for legal compliance. And that leads us right into the next post, which is, remember, just because it's on social media does not mean that the rules change. A lot of the same rules apply. Advertising claims, performance claims, you name it. Just because you're posting something on social media as opposed to your website, as opposed to a television commercial, does not mean that there are no rules. All of the same rules apply. Posts have to be truthful and accurate. Material connections have to be disclosed. And when it comes to truthful and accurate, that also means substantiating your claims. So our third point, if you are going to make any claims, you have to be able to substantiate them. If you're going to say, post something on LinkedIn that your company is going to be carbon neutral by 2030, you have to have sufficient substantiation to make that claim. All explicit and implied claims require substantiation. And some types of claims do get greater scrutiny than others. Claims, environmental claims, for example, as well as price, subscription services, performance. Those are claims that really get highly scrutinized. So you want to make sure that you have sufficient substantiation. You also want to be wary of anything that's seen as a guarantee of performance. So any comment about how a product or service will perform is going to be heavily scrutinized. So you need that sufficient substantiation. And it's probably worth, keep saying sufficient, it's probably worth maybe clarifying a little bit what I mean by that. And basically, you can't just rely on one person's opinion, one person's experience, or necessarily one study or test, unless you're going to specify that it's one person's opinion, one person's experience. And even then, there can be some risk associated with that. So it all kind of circles back around to that compliance mindset, that as you use all of these tools that you're hearing about today to increase and improve your social media presence, make sure that you also take a look at what compliance looks like for the footprint that you want to have on social media. So that brings us to our next and last slide, and then I'll pass it over to folks for questions. But in terms of compliance, what steps can you take to be compliant, to mitigate any unnecessary risk? And first, I would say establish and refresh your social media policy. If you don't have one, I would say adopt a policy. It's easy, it's simple. Most social media policies that I do are 2 pages. They can be very straightforward, and having that policy in place establishes a culture of compliance, first and foremost, which regulators always love to see. But it also ensures that everyone understands how to be compliant, that they understand what they can and can't do. And to make sure they do have that understanding, conduct regular training. And by regular, yearly works. I think that was referenced earlier in the presentation. Yearly training, so there's an opportunity to answer questions, to train new folks. It's also good to refresh the training because guidance can change. Right now, the FTC has some pending revisions to their social media enforcement guidance. So it's important to catch all of those things and stay on top of those developments. I would also mention pre-approved language when possible. I add when possible because it's not always practical, but particularly for certain messages about performance and things like that, if possible, pre-approving the language can be helpful. It helps ensure the language will be compliant. And then lastly, disclose any material relationships and direct traffic to the website where possible. What I mean by material is kind of a high-level legal overview. When there's a material relationship between the person making a post and the product or service that they're endorsing, that connection must be disclosed. And material has a very broad definition. The typical example is, paying a celebrity to post about a product. There's a material connection, they're being paid. But it also includes giving free product, and it also includes employment. It's essentially any sort of financial relationship or benefit that has to be disclosed. And for the disclosure itself, it has to be sufficient language and sufficient location. And the FTC does have some very specific guidance on what language is sufficient and what is not. And what location is sufficient and what is not. And this kind of circles back to that first point about a policy. Can be very, very helpful to put a policy in place because you can specify what disclosures are acceptable and also what locations are acceptable. So with that, I will pass it off, I believe, to Courtney.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That was absolutely amazing. And I know that I am so ready to get all of my content approved in 2023 and be in some great shape now. So we are now have concluded the presentation part. I think we did a great job of all sticking to 10 minutes. So we have 10 final minutes here. We're going to get through as many questions as possible. I think we can go ahead and get rid of the slides here. I don't think we're going to be, showing any references moving forward, so you can see our faces. There's a couple in the chat. I know, Devin, you have already gotten to. So I did want to just make sure that I flagged that, and also now share my first question that I'm reading from the audience. Last time I checked on carousels, they weren't rolled out across the board, and my company still gets random crop mashup format instead of the carousel when posting more than one photo. Devin, I know I have my cheat here, but can you jump in and share a little bit about how to successfully do that?
Yeah, the question was around access to carousels from your page. It is true that that's not ramped to 100% of entities on LinkedIn just yet. I was just trying to search for our ramp schedule, which actually, even if I do find it, I'm not able to share. But to answer your question, they're not. Carousels will be at 100% of entities on LinkedIn soon, but you're right. If you don't see it just yet, hang tight and you will soon.
Awesome, thank you. Next question here. Devin, I know that you answered this in the chat, but if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more, any best suggestions on best practices for using hashtags on LinkedIn? Where do people start?
Yeah, this has ebbed and flowed over time as well, the effectiveness of hashtags. I would say a good principle to just always use or best practice is shoot for 2 to 3 per post. And you can balance those 2 or 3 across like high level topics like private equity or economy or, investing or value creation or what have you. And then some specific hashtags relevant to 1 or 2 specific hashtags relevant to the topic of that post. So if you focus on, if it's a portfolio company and software or healthcare or manufacturing or logistics or real estate, then you can use 1 or 2 hashtags specific to the topic of that post.
And one more question, just while we're sticking on hashtags, and then I know, Leslie, I'm also seeing some questions in here for you. So Devin, one more throwing your way. Can you share a little bit more about tracking branded hashtags as a page admin? Can you please say more specifically about hashtag strategy for this industry? For example, using community hashtags versus branded custom hashtags.
Sure. So the community hashtags tool, I think a lot of people overlook on their company page. I don't manage a company page or not an admin or like an active admin for a company page. I do, though, Courtney, I'm wondering how to share with our attendees. We have a great PDF resource that I had shared with you and Tim before this event with all of that information and actually a lot of these best practices for company pages. I'll share that with the Edelman team and perhaps in a follow-up communication with all of you who have attended or registered for this event, we'll get that resource. It's a great PDF with a lot of pages of best practices that I'd encourage you to read through, including tips on using those community hashtags. But I would say you can put in hashtag private equity, you can put in hashtag your firm name, or if you're doing a campaign or something like that with a hashtag, or you're at an event like Milken or Super Return or something, you can put in that hashtag and then just have a nice kind of window to scroll at what people are saying using that hashtag. That gives you opportunities to jump in as a brand or a leader and engage with those posts.
You just teed up the question that I was going to answer, an easy one, which is, will these slides or this recording be shared afterwards? The answer is we are working on putting together kind of, that the reference that Devin just mentioned there, a couple, select materials from this. And then, of course, Tim and I, you have our emails and everything if you have more specific requests, but we will be sharing a select sample. Leslie, I would love to kind of like turn it over to you. Have a couple questions here. It looks like I know that you are typing some answers here, but I think one that looks like you haven't yet is, Leslie, is employment disclosure covered on LinkedIn if somebody lists your company as their employer?
That's a great question. I was trying to frantically get answers in since I saw Devin was able to get some answer, but I'm not as fast a typist. So the short answer is, on a platform like LinkedIn, that should be sufficient to have your employment listed there. If you're using a platform that requires the reader or user to click additional buttons, to look at other pages, Essentially, if the employment information would be kind of hidden or require additional steps to find, then that would not be sufficient.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Leslie, I saw that you did type a quick answer but just so the audience knows, Leslie also has an answer in there, about substantiating for posts about carbon neutral commitments. Just want to flag that because I do know that ESG continues to be a hot topic, especially amongst this group as well.
And I'll maybe just take a quick second to expand on that answer. I think the question was about if you're making, an ESG claim in a post, you have to put the substantiation in the post, or is it sufficient for legal to have it? And the short answer is it's sufficient for legal to have it, for legal to just have that support so that it's ever scrutinized. You kind of have the file and the support right there. It substantiates the claim. That being said, obviously, once you branch out of social media, lengthy articles, things like that, if you're making an ESG claim in a format that allows you to put a footnote to, if it's based on a public study or things like that, you may want to put a footnote and drop the information. But sometimes some of those claims also rely on confidential information to support them, future plans of the company and things like that. And so obviously, if it involves confidential information, just make sure that the legal department has that substantiation.
I'm so glad that you decided to add that, because while it looks like you sparked a question from another viewer. And that question is, Leslie, can business/compliance be held liable for comments posted by employees on LinkedIn? For example, a team member responds to a post saying best software company in the industry, or something like that might not fly for corporate posts.
That is a really good question. And the answer is yes and no. I hate when that's my answer. So it is yes, in the sense of if someone posts a comment, an employee or anyone posts a comment that makes an unsubstantiated claim and you're aware of that comment, you are required, if possible, to take it down or to post a response. So, if you're the maker of Tylenol and you're monitoring all of the reviews, on your website, and somebody posts, I took Tylenol and it cured my eczema, that's an unsubstantiated claim. It doesn't do that. And if you have seen the comment, read the comment, you do as a business have to, if you're capable, remove that because it's unsubstantiated, or add some sort of comment clarifying that, Tylenol does not cure eczema, etc. That being said, if an employee makes a comment on a site that you don't own or control or don't frequent or don't monitor in any way, you typically would not be held responsible for that. And I'll also flag that puffery claims do not require substantiation. And this question actually has the perfect example of puffery, which is, best software company in the industry, ! One could argue, maybe it's not the best example, but one could argue that that's puffery, that's really a claim that you can't substantiate, based on what? An example I give is, best software company in the universe. That's puffery, you can't substantiate it. And the FTC has said that doesn't require substantiation. I think there are also kind of arguments around if that came under scrutiny, I would argue it's opinion and things like that. But I would just generally use the rule of thumb that if it's an unsubstantiated claim that you monitor and you're aware of, you might need to take action.
Thank you so much. I know that we have less than 1 minute left, and I'm sure Tim was going to roll his eyes at me for asking, but there is one that I'm curious to get your take on. In terms of what you're seeing from, the majority of clients you're working with right now, how can, firms use social media to support, institutional asset raising, specifically lead generation?
It's a great question, and something that we think a lot about. You should certainly partner with someone like Leslie, though, when you're considering this during a fundraising season. But during your always on social media program, it is a great idea to post about your firm's investment strategy, what makes that approach unique and worth buying into, for lack of a better way of putting it. And what you're able to do using LinkedIn and that platform is support that post with paid media spend, as Devin and Courtney well know. And so that allows you to target those folks who you would want to approach to help your fundraising efforts.
Thank you. We did get a question asking about, TikTok and have any firms been active there to target institutional or retail investors? I will end there to say I think the only one of major note, at least at this moment in time, is Kim Kardashian's firm, Sky Brands. However, I think as you're thinking about, some of these questions in terms of expanding your channel presence, I think, of course, we've seen it with Twitter happen in the last, couple of weeks, months, especially. I think anything can change. It's anyone's game, and just making sure that you're reading the latest, staying in touch with people like myself, Devin, Tim, Leslie, and then, making sure you're making the most of it. We are almost 1 minute over, and that is all I had to say. Tim, any final thoughts before we close this?
No, thank you everybody for joining, and we'll be in touch with more material.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Leslie. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Take care.